There it is indeed. That music means it's time for the Sunday sermon. No hat this week, following last week's St George's Day. But this week I'm going to focus on the importance of being able to discuss things openly rather than covering them up, allowing the disinfectant effect of sunlight onto multiple areas of life. I mean, it's always better to sort of admit something and discuss it when problems arise, rather than pretend they don't exist, that they don't exist, or try and bury them under the carpet. That's how you get mutual trust and respect. And you just look at a few examples. I mean, I'm not a huge boxing fan, occasionally watch it, but some people don't like it at all. They say it's cruel, but you know full well that at the moment it's regulated. If boxing, for example, was banned, it would go underground, it would be unregulated, it would be much more dangerous. And the same thing, of course, is true, and you can see that from alcohol. If you ban alcohol completely, as you had in the US in the 1920s, about 100 years ago, what happened was it led to prohibition, and you had people drinking all sorts of unregulated alcohol, criminality, profiteering, much stronger hooch type stuff. Another classic example of what happens if you push something underground. Now, you could make the same point on the very controversial issue of drug taking. It's banned, and yet, of course, it leads to huge criminality, violence, death, profiteering. And you then ask your question, well, is there a better way if it's regulated? Question mark. I'm not giving a view either way on that in this sermon, but you see where I'm going with this. Sometimes it's better to actually have a sensible debate and regulated process. Likewise at work, you know, we've all had our issues occasionally with colleagues. It's always better to try and deal with it, chat it over, rather than let it fester and sort of simmer on. That's better for individuals, work colleagues, and indeed, therefore, the company itself. Or if you're concerned about a safety of a piece of equipment, particularly if it's sort of life critical, for example, on a train or a plane, it's always better to speak up rather than the risk of something breaking with potential risk of injury or indeed the risk to life. Likewise, if you're on a train, and we've all been there, and all of a sudden it stops and there's no information and you're wondering what's going on, you'd rather the truth rather than that sort of silence when you sort of wonder what on earth is happening. I think likewise, when we come to the issue of excess deaths in the UK, I'm going to be talking about that in the third hour of the show with a professor from the University of Oxford. Surely it's better that we discuss why there are significant excess deaths in the UK since the beginning of this year. You'd have thought after COVID, maybe there'd be less. So why are there more? And yet the government, and I've touched on it before and a few others have, the government's refusing to address this issue. It's refusing to properly analyse it and debate it with us. Where are the press conferences explaining why there's 20,000 plus excess deaths in the UK this year? Because if you don't discuss it, then what happens is that the conspiracy theories start. Debate goes underground, and the conspiracy theories, they mushroom, and all sorts of stuff gets mentioned, mad ideas, absurd ideas, unchecked. Now, the likelihood is that there are multiple causes of excess deaths in a nation where essentially we've got a health service health system that we know is failing us, that even people within the system are saying it's broken. You know, if you ring an ambulance, good luck. You might be better just getting a taxi. So we know there are multiple causes, but a government that refuses to admit there's even an issue with excess deaths is a government that's not being honest with its population. And I think that's a pretty bad place to be, because it leads to a complete loss of trust. And trust is so critical in the relationship between the people and our government, our authorities, the establishment. It's the foundation, because you can't govern if you haven't got the trust and the consent of the people. And the same is true with the issue of the side effects from vaccines. We know that any medication comes with the risk of side effects. Most medication obviously has been trialled for many years and tested so that you really know that it's absolutely minimised. But again, there's a deep reluctance by government to discuss the harms that have occurred from the COVID vaccine. And indeed, it's not just the government, it's the establishment, the medical world. Where's the open debate about this? A complete reluctance really to recognise that it exists, even within large chunks of the media. Because of course many of the leading lights in the media, when they were promoting the fact that everybody should take the vaccine, they therefore don't want to be embarrassed if actually there may be some side effects that have emerged, that clearly have emerged. Everybody knows they're there, but very few people, stroke no one, actually wants to talk about it. And I say again, if you don't discuss it, then the conspiracy theories start to mushroom and grow unchecked, unregulated, underground. That's why it's better to have that open discussion by those well qualified on both sides of the debate to talk about it, to share the experiences, the data, the anecdotes that are coming through. People from the world of medicine, the world of science, the world of data. Now, it's perfectly legitimate for leaders who were faced with unprecedented challenges to take the view, and this I suspect that if they were honest with us, is the view that they really did sort of take, which is say, look, we've got a national medical emergency here. We've got the potential for new treatments, vaccines, antivirals. And so we need to have emergency trials at a rapid time frame, much faster than a normal, with an emergency authorization, because we've got to get through this basis. It's therefore quite logical that if you're doing things on an emergency urgent basis, that you're more likely to have greater side effects from a medication that's been trialled just for a few months than from a medication, a vaccine, whatever it is, that's been trialled and tested for a decade or so. It's sort of like night follows day. It's quite logical. You just got to be open and honest with the public, and I think the public would have understood that. But of course, that wasn't actually what we were told, because originally we were told that the vaccines were for the elderly. It's 15 million jabs to the end of lockdowns in February 2021. 15 million jabs to our freedom. I remember, I think it was Rishi Sunak who actually said that on January the 1st, 2021. And that somehow morphed to all adults. How did that happen? Where was the genuine explanation about why that was the right thing to do? And then all of a sudden, having told us that it was definitely a vaccine for adults, there was massive debate and a pressure to vaccinate children, even though we knew this was an emergency authorization. If the government had been honest with people, I think we'd have been in a much better place. We have to have these debates, because when you have the debates and you get the data, that's how you learn from it and you improve as you move forward. As we look, well, we don't look forward, but as we know, we recognise we need to be prepared for the next pandemic-style crisis. I mean, logic says it's sort of inevitable, whether it's 5, 10 or 100 years down the track. But we know the government wasn't really willing to admit that it should learn from things. Even when things changes, when advice changes, we were told, weren't we, that they were following the best scientific advice. But then when the advice changed, and we learnt this from the WhatsApp messages, Hancock actually decided, no, I don't want to take the advice, because that might indicate that we might have got something wrong earlier. I'm talking specifically about the quarantine period that could have reduced from 12 days to 5 days. So where was the consistency and the honesty and the transparency there? And what happens then is people lose trust. And that's a very bad place to be. You lose trust and confidence in what the government is saying in that vital area of health. So rather than pretend that there are no harms, when the data shows actually it's better to really understand and assess and analyse what is going on, and then fairly compensate people. That surely is how you gain the trust. Now, there are people far more qualified to debate this issue than me, but I'm just looking at some of the data that's come out, and the context of this is extraordinary. Been about 151 million COVID vaccines given in the UK to some 53 million people have had one or more. That's as of Thursday, just gone, the government website. That is real data. The ONS data confirms that some 160,000 people sadly died with COVID from the beginning until the end of December 2022. But the ONS data also says that 52 people died because of the vaccine. Now, every death is a tragedy, particularly of a young person. Every death is sad, but especially so if it's a death from the vaccine, which I suspect is from people of a younger age group. Now, let's just touch on the vaccine damage payment scheme which the government runs. And this is from the government website. This is data. It only applies if you are 60% severely disabled, in which case you get a one-off payment of £120,000 tax-free. But there's no sliding scale to this. You've got to prove you're 60% disabled. Is that right and fair? And yet the government admits that it will take at least 6 months to process this. At least 6 months to process this. So if you've done the right thing, you've done what the government asked, you've taken the vaccine, you're then left severely disabled. You're left stranded with all the drama, the complete change in your life for you and your family. You're left stranded for at least 6 months, possibly 9 or 12, until you may get some help from the government that actually asked you to do the right thing. You did the right thing, and you sadly have been badly affected. And this is unbelievable. To the end of December 2022, just 31 payments totalling just under £4 million have been paid by the vaccine damage payment scheme. They've rejected some 491. They've received some 3,400. I mean, just think about those numbers. So we're talking about well under the number of people that the ONS and the government and the medical scientists and data the coroners accept have died from the vaccine. Only 31. That's well under the 52 who've sadly died. It's not surprising if public confidence starts to fall. And therefore it's not surprising if we hear that the number of people getting children vaccinated for other programmes, that is falling. And the government admits that 13 of the 14 child vaccination programmes numbers are falling. That's according to the UK Health Security Agency. I don't think this is good enough. I think this is a sign of a public administration that is out of touch, that is way too slow, and that is letting down ordinary, decent people across the country who did the right thing as they were asked to do. They felt they were doing the right thing for the nation and for their families and their communities. And then they're being utterly let down and shafted by an incompetent administration within the public sector. Now, I've called a number of times this year. There should be an urgent inquiry into excess deaths. And we need an honest debate about the impact of the side effects from the vaccines. That surely is the right thing to do. And for heaven's sake, to conclude, please, let's have a proper, sensible, fair vaccine damage payment scheme that's prompt, that's efficient, and has a sliding scale. Because many, many people have been affected, but have been left without any form of compensation or recognition. I just think it's an issue of fairness, and it's an issue of trust. And with that, here endeth my Sunday sermon.